Nominative, Accusative, Dativ. Life would have been so simple if German did not have these different cases. But the good news for you guys is that in this video, I will explain the concept of dative in the most simplest terms, and I will give you tips on how you can identify the dative in a sentence, so that you don't have any problem with it. Learning this concept of dative will give you the base to understand other concepts such as prepositions. I have already made a video explaining the accusative case in German, so if you have not yet checked it out, go and take a look at it right now. I will link it in the description below. Remember, German is not difficult and you can do it. So now let's not waste any time and let's understand dative. So we will start by first of all understanding what is the dative case in German. After that, we will take a look at when to use dative. Then I will tell you when to find the dative object in a sentence, because this will be important for you to know when you have to use the dative. Then we will take a look at the articles in dative. And at the end, we will take a look at the verbs with dative and how to identify them. You will also get a self-check form for practicing what you learn in this lesson. I know that these different cases, nominative, accusative and dative, are very confusing and make German language very complicated. But I can assure you that in this video I will explain this dative in the most simplest terms, so that at the end you have learned and understood this concept and don't have any problems with it. So let's start by understanding what is the dative case in German. So dative is one of the 4 cases that we have in German language. These are nominative, accusative, then we have dative, and the last one is genitive. Genitive is an A2 concept. We will take a look at it in the A2 course. And why do we have these different cases in German? This is because these cases help us to identify the context of a noun in a sentence. For example, with nominative, we know that we are talking about the subject. With accusative, we know we are talking about the object. Similar is the case with dative, and we will see right now what kind of object it represents and how we can identify it. So let's see when to use dative. So the dative case is used in 3 cases. The first is with indirect objects, the second is after specific verbs, and the third is after specific prepositions. In this lesson, we will take a look at the first and second point, and the third point, which is after specific prepositions. This will be done later. So let's first of all understand what are indirect objects and how the dative is used. So let's take a look at the example, Peter buys a table. This is the same example that we saw in the accusative lesson. Now in this example, we know that buys is the verb, Peter is the subject, and table is the object over here. Now let's change this example a little bit and add another person, which is Thomas. And we say that Peter buys Thomas a table. So this means that Peter does not buy a table for himself, but for Thomas. Now in this sentence, Peter remains as the subject and table remains as the object. But what is Thomas? What is his role in this sentence? So if we take a look, then Thomas is the one who benefits from the action because he is the one receiving the table. So any person who benefits from the action which is being done is the indirect object. Let's take another example. So I say, I give the child a book. So over here, I am the subject, book is the object, and the child is the one who benefits from this action. That is, he or she receives the book. So the child will be the indirect object in this sentence. Or we can say that Thomas and the child are dative. Now based on these examples, let me give you some points on how you can identify the dative. So the first point is what we saw already, is that the person who benefits from the action is dative. The second point is that only living beings can be dative. This means a book or a table cannot be dative. Only a child, a man, a woman, or anything which is living can be dative. The third point is that if you have 2 objects in a sentence, then the living being or the person will be dative and the thing will be accusative. We already saw this in the examples which we saw earlier, as in both these cases the dative is either Thomas or the child, and the thing which is table or the book are both accusative. So with these 3 points, you can identify the dative in a sentence. But why is this important? Why are we learning this? The reason is that in German, the articles for dative are different from nominative and accusative. And when you are talking about the dative, then you have to use the correct articles. Now let's take a look at the articles in dative. So I have divided the articles in bestimmter Artikel, which are definite articles, and unbestimmter Articles, which are indefinite articles. So we already know that for nominative, we have the articles der for masculine, die for feminine, das for neutral, and die for plural. In case of accusative, we have the articles den for masculine, die for feminine, das for neutral, and die for plural. For dative, the article for masculine is dem, for feminine it will be der, for neutral it will be dem, and for plural it will be den. So the articles in case of dative are different from the nominative and accusative cases. For unbestimmte Articles or indefinite articles, in nominative the article is ein for masculine, eine for feminine, and ein for neutral. For accusative, the article for masculine is einen, for feminine it is eine, and for neutral it is ein. For dative, the unbestimmte Artikel or indefinite article for masculine will be einem, for feminine it will be einer, and for neutral it will be einem. So these are the bestimmter and unbestimmter articles for dative in German. Now let's see how we can use them in sentences. Let's take the masculine case first of all. So an example sentence can be Peter buys the man a table, and man over here is der Mann. So the sentence in German will become Peter kauft dem Mann einen Tisch. Now Mann over here is dative, and that's why we use dem, as that is the article which we use for masculine. The same example with an unbestimmter article is Peter buys a man a table, so this will become Peter kauft einem Mann einen Tisch. Now let's take an example with the feminine noun in dative. So an example can be Peter brings the woman a cat, and woman we know is die Frau in German. So this will become Peter bringt der Frau eine Katze. The same example with an unbestimmter article will be Peter bringt einer Frau eine Katze. So Peter brings a woman a cat. Let's also consider the neutral case. So an example will be Peter gives the child a book, and child is das Kind in German. So this sentence will become Peter gibt dem Kind ein Buch. So when we take the unbestimmter case, then the sentence will be Peter gibt einem Kind ein Buch. Let's take a case with the plural. So an example will be Peter brings the guests the drinks, and guests are die Gäste in German. So this will become Peter bringt den Gästen die Getränke. So we use the article den over here. But there's one change over here which you might have noticed, and that is that we have used an extra n at the end of Gäste. So whenever you use the plural in dative, then you must add n at the end of plural noun. Let's take another example to understand this better. So I have the sentence Peter gives the children the toys, and children in German are die Kinder. So this is the plural form. However, when we use this in dative, then the sentence will be Peter gibt den Kindern die Spielzeuge. So you see, we have added an n at the end over here as well. So you have to keep this in mind, that whenever you use the plural in dative, then you have to add an extra n at the end of the plural noun. So now we have learned about articles in dative and also how to use them with indirect objects. Let's take a look at how to use dative after specific verbs. So these verbs are also called Verben mit Dativ. And what are these Verben mit Dativ? So these are some specific verbs after which we use the dative form. So whenever we have this verb, we will use the dative form of the noun after it. And there are not so many verbs which use dative in German. There are around 50 verbs with dative, and only 20 to 30 are commonly used. So if you know these, then it is good enough. And usually the only way to know these verbs is to memorize them. However, I will give you some categories with which it will be easier for you to identify these verbs. So these verbs can be divided into three major categories. The first one is the verbs for giving, usually require the dative form after them. The second is the verbs for sharing information or feelings. also mostly require the dative form after them. And the third is the verbs showing belonging or relationship between people and things also mostly require the dative form after them. Now let's take a look at each of these categories and some examples. So we start with the verbs for giving. So some commonly used verbs for giving which need the dative after them are geben, which means to give, schenken, which means to gift, bringen, which means to bring, helfen, which means to help, and schicken, which means to send. So you see, in all of these verbs you are giving something. So an example sentence will be Ich helfe dem Mann. I help the man. So over here you see we have not used der or den Mann. Rather we have used dem Mann, which is the dative for masculine. Now you can translate this sentence in another way as well, which is I give help to the man. So when you translate this sentence like this, then it becomes easier to recognize the subject, object, and indirect object. So I am the subject over here, help is being given, so it is the object, and the person who is benefiting from it is the man. So you know that the man is the indirect object. So whenever you want to find the dative, you can also try to do this alternative translation to find the indirect object. However, it might not work in all the cases, but in some cases it will work and will help you identify the dative. Let's take a look at the verbs for sharing information or feelings. So these are, for example, sagen, which means to say, danken, which means to thank, antworten, which means to answer, empfehlen, which means to recommend, erklären, which means to explain something, zuhören, which means to listen, gratulieren, which means to congratulate, gefallen, which means to please, vertrauen, which means to trust, and mitteilen, which means to share. So these are some of the commonly used ones. An example sentence can be Ich gratuliere dem Kind. I congratulate the child. So over here we have also used dem, which is the dative article for neutral nouns. And if you remember my earlier point, this sentence can also be translated as I give congratulations to the child. So you see over here, the child is the one who benefits from the action or who receives the congratulations. So in this way you can find out the dative in a sentence. Let's take another sentence which is commonly used, and that is das gefällt mir, that pleases me. So if you see in the verbs above, gefallen is also a verb which requires the dative after it, and in this example, mir is the personal pronoun in dative for first person singular. We will learn the personal pronouns in dative in another lesson, but I have just given this example over here so that whenever you hear this kind of sentence, then you know that the dative form is being used over here. Now let's take a look at some of the verbs showing belonging or relationship between people and things which require the dative. So these are gehören, which means to belong, gleichen, which means to resemble, passen, which means to suit or fit, fehlen, which means to be missing, and ähneln, which means to be similar to. So an example can be Das Kind gehört der Frau. The child belongs to the woman. So over here we have also used der, which is the dative article for feminine nouns. So these were just some examples of commonly used verbs which require the dative noun after them. I have made a PDF with common dative verbs which you can find in the description below. You will also find examples with these dative verbs in this PDF. You can take a look at it and understand them and also memorize them. So with this, we come to the end of the lesson. I hope that all the confusion that you had about dative in the start is now finished, and now you have understood this dative concept and can use it in sentences and your daily life. So I hope that this video was helpful for you. As always, if you have any questions or any feedback, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much for your time and see you guys in the next video.